You know, we're talking about this voice. I cannot believe that Australia is at a point where all the lovies and on all sides of politics, media, they're rushing to tell us, oh, this thing is great, it's going to make us a better country. What do you think?
You can't believe that? Where have you been for the last decade? I mean, I'm surprised that you're surprised. Of course they are. This is, again, what we're talking about last segment. If you believe that Australia is a deeply intolerant, racist country, then you will have a belief that something like this is needed to correct that. This fits that belief system perfectly of the left, who have become obsessed with identity politics, become obsessed with race and things that divide us as opposed to things that bring us together.
James, answer my question. What will the voice solve that Parliament can't?
Well, I can't imagine it will do anything except for undermine the Australian Compact. And, you know, we have a very lucky situation here. We have a complex, multicultural nation. We have our Indigenous past. We have the Anglo-settler Australia that the modern Australia was based on. And then we've had our post-World War II migration. These live in balance. Putting into Parliament, into legislation even if not the Constitution, something based on race upsets that balance, and it ultimately cuts at the foundation of this very precious gift that we have in Australia. And I'm looking forward to talking to our next guest about where all of this can go.
Well, let's do that right now. I'm delighted to introduce two outsiders. Author, social psychologist and professor of ethical leadership. He is the author of several books, including the must-read 2018 book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and he is currently touring Australia. Jonathan Haidt, welcome to Outsiders.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, Jonathan, you're warning that democracy may well perish in the United States, so let's get right down to the nitty-gritty stuff. Tell us your thoughts on why that could happen.
So what we've done in the United States and what you've done in Australia is create something that probably shouldn't exist. That is a large, secular, diverse, multicultural democracy. People are tribal by nature. We're very good. We easily come together in small tribal groups. We easily come together in feudal systems. But democracies are kind of unstable, and you have to do things to keep them together. In the United States, we had a great 20th century, and a lot of forces conspired to keep us together, fighting evil in World War II and against the communists. We overcame a lot of our racism problems, or at least we made progress. But a lot of that's coming apart now in the 21st century. And the signs I see are that if we increasingly hate each other, distrust the system, and don't have a sense of shared fate or shared future, it's not clear that a large multicultural democracy can survive.
James?
I want to get into the question of social media because that's one of the things I think you talk about a lot, and we've seen in the last 10 years since Facebook and such came on the scene around 2007. Is this new technology, which is supposedly at the forefront of, you know, what we use computers for and everything, is this actually making us more primitive and sending us back to a tribal nature of politics where we, instead of being able to come together under a national umbrella, at least, if not a human umbrella, that just turns us into this sort of Manichaean fight between I'm good, you're evil, rather than, look, I've got these ideas, you've got these ideas, let's talk about it and meet in the middle.
Well, that's right. I don't have much to add to the way you introduced it. The reason I'm so pessimistic is precisely because of the way social media has, in a sense, reached into the fabric of society and changed some of the basic parameters. I recently reread the story of Babel in the Bible, you know, where God comes down and he says, these human beings are getting too powerful. Come, let us go down and confound their language. And that sort of is what social media has done to us. It's very hard to have a kind of a shared understanding of who we are and what we're doing, and then we can have debates about policy. But once social media came in, it accelerated the process that began with cable TV of allowing lots of different groups, lots of different moral matrices, lots of different little shared realities. And we may never be able to have a common understanding of what's going on again. So I was worried about rising incivility 10 years ago, but now I'm really much more worried.
I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about your research you did, what you called the conservative advantage. This was in your book, The Righteous Mind, where you had did some research with a bunch of progressive students and a bunch of conservative students and asked to see how they understood each other. Tell us about that, because I think those findings are just fascinating and tell us so much.
Okay. Certainly. So I'm a social psychologist. That means that I do experiments to study morality. That's my topic, is moral and political psychology. And I was always on the left when I was younger, and I was upset that the Democrats kept losing when I thought they should have won, especially in the 2000 election and the 2004 elections. So I set out to understand how progressives think, how conservatives think, and what I discovered is that, well, everybody values issues of care and compassion and also various kinds of fairness. What I found is that when conservatives talk about politics, they also bring in a bunch of other moral foundations. It's almost as though on their tongues they have more taste buds. Conservative moral appeals also rest on group loyalty, respect for authority or tradition or order, and a sense of sanctity or purity. Whereas progressive appeals, progressive arguments, or left-leaning arguments tend to really focus pretty narrowly on care and compassion for the vulnerable and fairness, especially fairness as equality. Now, those are very important moral foundations, but most Americans are not satisfied by just that sort of thing. Politics is more like religion, and what I've found is that conservative politicians have a built-in advantage in that they more easily talk about what unites us all, the greatness of the country, our traditions, things like that.
Now, I want to ask you, Jonathan, I learnt a new word from reading you, which was very exciting, which was centripetal. And you were talking about, I played Martin Luther King's clip earlier, how the morality that Martin King, the dream that he was looking forward to, was based on an inclusive nature. He actually goes to say white boys playing, white boys and white girls playing with black boys and girls. Whereas that whole idea has been supplanted with the new tribalism. Talk to us about race in America.
Oh, good. I'd love to. If I can leave one idea with you here in Australia that might help where you are right now, it is this. Identity politics is essential. You have to have identity politics in a multicultural nation. What Martin Luther King was doing was identity politics, but there's two very different kinds of identity politics. There's what we call common humanity identity politics, where we emphasize that we are all human and some of our brothers and sisters are not being given justice. That's what King did. The other way is you use what's called common enemy identity politics, which is you say, they're the bad people. Those are the people who are causing all our problems. And in America, we now have a kind, especially on our college campuses, we have a kind of identity politics in which students come into campus and they're taught, see people on these binary dimensions, white versus non-white, white male versus non-male, English speaker versus non-English speaker. Whatever dimensions of power and privilege you can point out, make people more conscious of them. Now, of course, power exists, power matters, but that can't be the only lens that you use to look at all of society. And the more you teach young people to see people as good or bad based on their race, the worse. So what I would say is don't go saying, oh, no identity politics. Rather, go saying, can we have the kind of identity politics that actually can lead to a solution and to peace in a complex multicultural society? Or are we going to follow the United States and emphasize differences? I don't know any way that that leads to a good outcome.
Well, absolutely. And I think we are heading down the path, the dangerous path of separating and emphasising those differences, James.
But that's actually where I want to ask you next here, because in Coddling of the American Mind, you talk a lot about how this generation that has been raised on social media has come up and they're now in universities and they are playing with the most venomous sorts of identity politics. We see this in Australian campuses today. When these people go into the real world and they start to work in offices, they become, God forbid, our HR managers and our executives and all sorts of things like that. Will they continue to play these sorts of, have this sole frame to look at the world? And is that going to make it very hard for those of us who might be older and want to have this sort of more richer moral panoply of ideas, hard for us to get back to that original idea, that good identity politics, as you might put it?
Yes, that is exactly what is happening. First, just to be a little more nuanced about this, let me make clear that most members of Gen Z, that is, kids born in 1996 and after, most members of them are doing fine. They don't go in for this kind of identity politics. They're going to make perfectly good employees. But a large number, especially those that go to our elite schools, are trained in this kind of common enemy identity politics. So that's one piece, is the politics. Another piece, a separate piece, is that Gen Z has extraordinarily high rates of anxiety and depression. We don't know why, but I believe the evidence is strongly pointing to the arrival of social media, especially for 10 to 14-year-olds. They shouldn't be on it. It's too young. It changes their brain development, I believe. So you have this big wave of more anxious and fragile students coming into universities and now just graduating, going into the working world. And you have this new common enemy identity politics that a small subset of them have. What's happening in the United States now, as I talk to business leaders, is they say, these recent college grads, my young employees, it's like someone said something and now the whole company's in an uproar. It is making it very hard to work. Students have to learn how to be cooperative, how to have thicker skin, how to be a little less judgmental, how to get along. And a lot of college students have been overprotected and accommodated so much. They expect, when they go out into the real world, as we say, they expect it's going to be like college. And so far, they're right. That is, a lot of businesses are giving in and are giving them what they're asking for.
Jonathan, just very quickly, one last question before we go. You say that democracy is a very rare and special thing. We almost kind of fluked it, and you're worried that we're going to lose it. I know it's a huge topic, but just in a minute, just give us your thoughts on that.
Yes, well, the founding fathers of the United States did not want a democracy. They followed Plato in saying that democracy tends to decay into tyranny, demagoguery, things like that. So it's very important to limit the democratic elements. That people have to have a say in throwing out the government if they don't like it. What's happening now in the United States is that while we had a great 20th century and a lot of centripetal forces pulled us into the center, we thought democracy was easy. We were wrong. The founding fathers were right. Democracy is very hard. So I think all of us in these Western liberal democracies, we have to educate our people as though democracy is important and fragile, and we have to emphasize skills of getting along with people who differ from you, not just by race, but by politics. We're coming apart in the United States, not so much by race, but by left-right, further and further apart, unable to compromise. That's why I'm so worried.
Jonathan Haidt, you've been brought here thanks to Think Inc., and people can see you on your tour. I urge them to read your books. They can find you online. Thanks so much for joining Outsiders this morning, Jonathan Haidt.